The Secret Garden, an original story based on Francis Hodgson Burnett's classic, 1911. Mary Lennox had never cared much for anything until she found the robin. She'd been wandering the grounds of Misselthwaite Manor for weeks, her pale face as sour as ever, when Thiesmal bird appeared on a branch above her head and seemed to look directly at her with its bright, knowing eyes. "What are you staring at?" she asked crossly, but the robin merely tilted its head and flew to another branch nearby, as if inviting her to follow. The grounds of her uncle's Yorkshire estate stretched endlessly in all directions, most of it wild and untended. Mary had grown up in India with servants attending to her every need, never having to think about gardens or growing things. But something about this particular corner of the manor grounds felt different, hidden, secret, forgotten. The robin led her along an old brick wall, covered so thickly with ivy that she could barely see the stones beneath. As she pushed through the overgrown path, her fingers caught on something hard and metallic buried in the tangle of vines. A key. Old and rusty, but unmistakably a key. Her heart began to pound with an excitement she'd never felt before. Where there was a key, there must be a door. It took her nearly an hour of searching, pulling away ivy and brambles until her hands were scratched and dirty, something that would have horrified her just months ago. But when she finally found the door, nearly invisible beneath years of neglect, Mary felt as though she'd discovered treasure. The key turned with difficulty, the lock protesting after years of disuse. When the door finally swung open, Mary stepped into another world. The garden was a tangle of wild beauty and ruin. Rose bushes had grown into enormous thorny trees. Weeds choked pathways that must have once been carefully tended. But beneath the chaos, Mary could see the bones of something magnificent. Flower beds laid out in careful patterns, a small fountain at the center, fruit trees heavy with unpruned branches. This had been someone's paradise once. Over the following weeks, Mary found herself returning to the garden every day. At first, she simply sat and looked, trying to imagine what it might have been like when it was cared for. Then slowly, she began to clear away the worst of the weeds. Her hands grew strong from digging. Her cheeks flushed pink from the fresh air and exercise. She discovered she wasn't the only one who needed healing. Deep in the manor, behind locked doors and drawn curtains, lived her cousin Colin, pale, sickly, convinced he would die young like his mother. When Mary finally met him during one of his terrible tantrums, she saw something familiar in his angry, frightened eyes. He was as lonely and lost as she had been. "There's something I want to show you," she told him one spring morning when the garden had begun to respond to her amateur care. "But you'll have to trust me." Getting Colin to the garden required the help of Dickon, the local boy who seemed to speak the language of growing things. Between the three of them, they managed to wheel Colin's chair down the hidden paths to the secret door. When Colin saw the garden, really saw it, with buds swelling on the rose bushes and early flowers pushing through the soil Mary had turned, something changed in his face. The fear left his eyes, replaced by wonder. "It's alive," he whispered. "It's all coming alive." They worked together through that spring and summer, the three children and their garden. Colin grew stronger, eventually abandoning his wheelchair to walk among the flowers he'd helped plant. Mary discovered she had a gift for coaxing life from the earth. And Dickon shared his knowledge freely, teaching them both that gardens, like people, needed patience, care, and belief in their ability to grow. By autumn, the secret garden had been transformed from a place of abandonment into a sanctuary of beauty. But more importantly, the children had been transformed too. Mary had learned to love something outside herself. Colin had discovered he was not fragile but strong. And together, they had proved that with enough care and determination, even the most neglected things could bloom again. When Colin's father finally returned from his long travels, drawn by reports of his son's miraculous recovery, he found not the dying child he'd left behind, but a healthy, laughing boy running through a garden that had been restored to life. The secret garden had kept its greatest secret after all, that healing and hope could grow anywhere, as long as someone was willing to tend them with love